My name is Alex. I'm just an ordinary 38-year-old guy. Ever since my younger days, I'd grown tired of the constant grind of work, and as a result, my health began to deteriorate. Before I hit 40, I decided to retire early. After 20 years away, I returned to my beautiful seaside hometown, where I had left when I was 18. Now, I live as a fisherman, working 3 days a week and enjoying fishing. It was my grandfather, John, who introduced me to this job. He married young and had my father the following year. Since my father also married young, even at my age, my grandfather is still only 78 and continues to fish on a smaller scale. He used to take care of me a lot when I was little, so now that I'm back, he's overjoyed to have me around. Now that I'm home, he often takes me out on his small fishing boat and, before I know it, says, "Why don't you take over for me?" and started getting me involved in the fishing business. Well, I wasn't planning to go back to my old job anyway, so I figured it wouldn't be too bad to spend the rest of my life with nature. So I quickly agreed and started fishing with him. But watching my grandfather work all those years and actually doing the job myself turned out to be worlds apart. First of all, everything smells so fishy. On top of that, hauling in the nets, cleaning the fish, everything requires serious physical strength. Even though I was just helping my grandfather at first, it was tough, and in my heart, I was already complaining, I don't want to do this anymore. But seeing my expression, my grandfather would grin and say, "Hey, what's with that pathetic look on your face? At this rate, you'll never be my right-hand man. Come on, bend your knees and pull properly." He knew how competitive I was, and this was always his way of motivating me. It was the same when I started playing sports seriously in school. The practices were brutal, and the coach was tough. But whenever I was about to give up, my grandfather would say something like, "Oh, so you're gonna quit just because some old guy yelled at you? You're not great at studying or talking, so what do you have to be proud of? Do you really think you'll achieve anything if you quit now? Push yourself and accomplish at least one thing that feels tough." Looking back now, I realize it was pretty harsh, essentially telling his own grandson that he had nothing good going for him. But my grandfather wasn't wrong. If I had quit the thing I started because I wanted to back then, I probably would have carried a sense of inferiority, feeling stuck with the regret of not giving my all in my studies or in sports. Having someone seriously scold me, then analyzing my weaknesses and working hard to fill those gaps. That's a lesson that applies to both studying and work. Plus, sticking with sports gave me the chance to talk to all kinds of people, from different ages and backgrounds. Because of that, I think I learned how to communicate with people who were totally different from me. I'm sure my grandfather, who always saw me as slow and clumsy, knew I would struggle once I entered the workforce. That's why he was determined not to let me quit the sports club. He wanted to toughen me up. Now that I've been through the challenges of adult life, I finally understand what he was trying to do. Thanks to that sense of accomplishment I gained from sticking with sports, I was able to dive into my studies with focus. Later, I got a job known for being grueling, but the resilience, physical strength, and people skills I developed through sports helped me cover for my natural clumsiness. For a while, I was caught up in work day and night in the city, but after days of not sleeping properly, my mind and body started to wear down. Before I knew it, I had aged prematurely, looking much older than I actually was. I was only in my 20s but looked like I was in my late 30s. At the time, I was appreciated by everyone around me, respected by colleagues, and felt fulfilled. But if you ask me if I'd want to go back to that time, the answer is no. These days, I hear young people bragging about how little they sleep or how many hours they work, but I think that's pointless. In fact, Pushing myself too hard resulted in terrible results during my health checkups, fearing I'd end up seriously ill. I saved as much money as I could and decided that I didn't care about career advancement anymore. I handed in my resignation. My bosses tried to stop me multiple times, but there was no way I was going to trade my life and health for a job. My decision was firm. Now, I'm working with my grandfather, keeping active, though it's a bit harder than moderate work. Some might think I'm still young enough to work harder, but at that time, my body's age was equivalent to someone in their late 60s. Rather than continuing to wear myself down while I still had some energy, I figured it made more sense to quit early and extend my healthy years. I'd even heard stories of office workers who neglected their health, only to develop cirrhosis and receive a terminal diagnosis in their 50s. Those stories made my resolve even stronger. So, even though I won't be praised for accumulating more savings or feel personal growth, I'm fine with that. Realizing that my health is my most valuable asset, that's my greatest wealth. Watching my grandfather dive into the sea and catch all kinds of seafood made me want to do the same. That's also one of the reasons I decided to become a full-time fisherman. To catch seafood like that, I had to join the fishing cooperative and officially become a fisherman. As a result, I earned the necessary qualifications to dive into the nearby sea and harvest abalone and other seafood. This island also has a thriving farming community, with plenty of fields and rice paddies. We often exchanged various crops from the fields for seafood, and every day we ate delicious, fresh food. In this way, my life on the island became pretty fulfilling. One day, as I was walking along the harbor with my fishing gear like usual, I spotted something unusual floating in the sea, something big and pinkish purple. What is that? It didn't look like regular trash or clothing, and it seemed oddly rounded and three-dimensional. As I stared at it, suddenly I heard a splash, and the thing started thrashing around. To my surprise, the pink object was actually a young girl, probably around elementary school age. This is bad, she's going to sink if I don't help. Seeing her struggling desperately, I found myself sprinting across the sandy beach. I dashed across the sand and plunged into the water. Wading through the waves, I swam with all my might toward the girl. At that moment, I realized why my grandfather had drilled swimming into me so hard when I was younger. There's nothing much to do around here, so even small kids end up playing near the water. Even with parents being careful, it's common for kids to fall into the sea like this. My grandfather must have wanted me to be able to jump in and rescue someone if needed. Which is why he taught me how to swim for long stretches in deep water. Holding the struggling girl and floating at the surface, I was sincerely grateful that I had listened to my grandfather's advice. However, the girl was panicking and continued thrashing about. Hey! If you keep struggling, you'll sink. You've got to calm down. Stop fighting. But she was too frantic to hear me, and it felt like she might slip out of my arms at any moment. Just then, a loud, deep horn sounded in the distance. Hey! Alex! Grab onto this. My grandfather had noticed the situation, speeding toward us in his boat. He shouted while throwing us a life ring. Ah! Grandpa! You're a lifesaver. Grabbing onto the life ring with all my strength, I turned to the girl, calling out, "Look, help's here now. You're going to be fine. So you don't need to struggle anymore." Finally realizing she was saved, the girl stopped thrashing. Phew, I can finally relax a bit. I swam toward the boat, holding onto the life ring as it was being pulled along. The girl, exhausted from all the struggling, stayed silent, staring at one spot while I held her. As we got close to the boat, I lifted the girl out of the water, and my grandfather pulled her up with his strong arms. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, but the girl, startled by his firm tone, said nothing. Grandpa, noticing her silence, said she might have swallowed a lot of water. "We should get her checked out, just in case. Let's head to the doctor." After pulling me up, he revved the engine, and we quickly arrived back on shore. I rushed to my things and called the island's largest clinic. A young female doctor answered, and after explaining the situation, she said, "Let's have a look at her just to be safe." Meanwhile, my grandfather hurriedly asked the nearby residents if anyone had children's clothes to keep the girl from getting cold. This island, my hometown, is small. Because of that, everyone here knows each other and always helps one another out. No one was unfamiliar with my grandfather, and everyone tried to assist. However, with the aging population, it was hard to find anyone with clothes that would fit a young girl. The local school had been closed down long ago, and many of the younger families had moved away from the island. Most of the elderly residents had long since thrown out old children's clothes. However, as my grandfather kept asking around, he finally found someone who might have some. A couple in their 50s, considered young on this island, lent him some clothes and a towel that their son used to wear. And my grandfather hurried back to where my car was parked. He dashed back to my car, carrying the boy's clothes, which were close enough in size to fit the girl. We handed them to her and encouraged her to get into the car. We made sure to cover the windows to give her some privacy and handed her a towel. "Here, dry yourself off and change out of those wet clothes. After that, we'll head to the doctor," I said. The girl looked frightened. I smiled and reassured her, "It's okay. Nothing scary will happen. Thankfully, it doesn't look like you're hurt. We just need to make sure you're all right." Still looking nervous, she quietly closed the car door. After a moment, I heard her softly say, "Thank you," as she began to dry herself off and change. Once she had finished changing, my grandfather asked her, "Whose child are you?" But to our surprise, she said she wasn't from the island. "No wonder I didn't recognize you. So, how are we going to find your parents?" Grandpa said, looking worried. The girl didn't remember her parents' phone numbers and said she was here for the first time, on a trip with her mother. She wasn't even sure where they'd gotten separated. We both stood there for a moment, thinking. Her mother must be looking for her too, we figured. Surely, she'd have asked the locals and made her way to the police station by now. We decided to call later. Maybe we'd get some news from the clinic, or perhaps the police station had already reached out. With that in mind, we headed to the clinic to get the girl checked out. The island's only clinic had once been run by an elderly doctor who was known for being skilled but gentle. However, with age, he developed heart problems. After several treatments, he eventually returned to work. But he started reducing his clinic hours until he could no longer manage. That's when a young female doctor came forward, wanting to take over the clinic. At first, there were concerns about whether such a young-looking, inexperienced doctor would be okay. But it turned out she was actually around my age. Because of her skill and extensive experience, he decided to entrust the clinic to her. Since none of his children had pursued medicine, people had worried about the future of healthcare on the island, but she was seen as a savior. And the community was grateful to have her. The clinic, though old, was built with calming wooden tones, giving it the feel of a cozy retreat. Maybe that's why, as we approached the building, the girl seemed to relax a little. Opening the glass doors, we were greeted by the young doctor, who had a warm and gentle demeanor. "Ah, you must be Alex. Please come in," she said. Hearing that, I stepped into the clinic, and inside, it had been beautifully renovated. I was surprised. I remembered the old, dark floors with black stains, but now the space was bright, with large windows and a soothing wood interior. Even the old bookshelves had been replaced, now lined with magazines for the elderly. As I looked around, amazed at how much had changed, I saw the girl still looking a bit scared as she slowly followed my grandfather into the exam room. "Don't worry, nothing scary will happen. You were rescued quickly, so I'm sure you're fine," Grandpa said, gently patting her back. The girl finally relaxed a bit, her tense face softening as she entered the exam room with the doctor. The results of the exam showed that the girl's body was perfectly fine. Even though we had said she'd be okay, hearing the official result made us sigh with relief. During the exam, my grandfather contacted the police station, and sure enough, her mother had come in asking about her and was on her way to the clinic. When the girl heard this, her face lit up instantly, and she gave me her first smile, saying, "Really? Thank you." Not long after, we saw a woman running frantically toward the clinic from outside. Bang! "I'm so sorry. It seems my daughter caused you trouble." The woman, out of breath from running, was in her 30s, and she was beautiful and elegant. After scolding her daughter, she introduced herself as Lily. Then, she turned to the girl and said, "Hey, did you tell these people your name and thank them properly?" The girl, as if just realizing, suddenly snapped to attention and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Emily. Thank you so much for saving me." My grandfather responded, No, as long as she's safe, that's all that matters." "And you already thanked us earlier, didn't you?" After an experience like that, it's only natural to forget. "Don't be too hard on her." Lily apologized again and bowed her head multiple times. Then she turned to me and said, "You're Alex, the one who saved my daughter, right?" I assumed the police must have told her, and I replied, "Yes, that's right." She continued, "I can't thank you enough for saving my daughter's life. I don't even know how to express my gratitude. There's really no need. I just did what anyone would do. No, I can't leave it at that. You saved her life, and I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't been there. I'm truly grateful." Tears welled up in her eyes as she bowed over and over again. It's true, if the girl had kept struggling, she might not have survived. In fact, accidents where people fall into the sea and never return are not uncommon around here. So Lily was likely blaming herself for losing sight of her daughter near the water. As I was unsure what to say to her, my grandfather chimed in, "At her age, kids are full of energy. It happens. But do be more careful next time." Lily wiped her eyes and nodded. Then she scolded Emily, "Why did you go off to such a dangerous place by yourself?" Emily replied, "Well, the men looked like they were having so much fun swimming. Ah, she must have seen us diving for abalone the day before," I thought. "She must have figured that if she jumped in the water, she could have fun just like us." Still, I had to admit, for a kid to jump into the sea fully clothed like that, she had guts. We've had special training and are certified divers. The gear we wear is totally different from what you had on. You understand now. After getting in the water with your clothes on, how dangerous it can be, right?" Emily nodded quietly. Afterward, I made her promise not to do anything like that again. Even though I insisted it wasn't necessary, Lily handed me an envelope before taking Emily's hand, bowing, and leaving. As I watched them walk away, I thought to myself, she's quite the adventurous kid. If she ever wants to try diving again when she's older, she should come back and get trained properly. After they left, My grandfather glanced at me and laughed. Ha! You saved a girl with the swimming I taught you. But because of your age and lack of exercise, you couldn't even get back on the boat by yourself. You've still got a long way to go, kid. Hey, give me a break. I tried my hardest, I retorted, glaring lightly at him. Noticing someone staring at us during our conversation, I turned and asked, "Is something wrong?" to the young doctor, who had just finished tidying up after the exam. For some reason, she was staring at us intently. Then she said, I didn't realize earlier because things were hectic, but your name is John, right?" she asked my grandfather. Yes, that's right. Well, this is kind of a coincidence, but when I realized you were John, I was so surprised. I'm Mia. Do you remember me? As she looked directly at my grandfather, he paused to think, and then his eyes widened. Mia from back then. With that, he began sharing stories of the past with Mia. When my grandfather was much younger, Mia and her parents had temporarily moved to the island. Mia had been a sickly child back then and often missed school, unable to attend classes with everyone else. The more she missed school, the more distance she felt from her classmates, which made it even harder to go. Even when others tried to be friendly, that gap was difficult to bridge. Eventually, Mia decided to focus on resting and recovering through middle school, so she could attend a regular high school. Though her parents, both doctors, made sure she kept up with her studies, having family teach her was often tough. Lonely from not having friends at school, Mia spent many days in tears. One day, while out for a walk, she spotted my grandfather, swimming joyfully in the sea. As Mia watched my grandfather swimming so freely in the sea, she thought to herself, it must be so much fun to swim like that. Noticing her gaze, my grandfather waved her over. When Mia ran to the water's edge, he swam closer and began teaching her how to catch fish in the shallows. From that day on, she started visiting my grandfather regularly, squeezing in trips to the shore between her studies. Her parents, seeing that it was helping to build her strength, allowed her to play by the sea. Slowly, Mia's smile began to return as she spent more time with my grandfather, surrounded by nature. She even made friends with the local children through her seaside adventures, gaining companions her own age. At that time, Mia's face was completely different from when she first arrived on the island. The pale, frail girl who had walked anxiously, holding her parents' hands, had transformed into a sun-kissed, energetic child. The island kids were kind and open, welcoming Mia without any barriers, despite her being from outside the island. Because of this, Mia felt free to befriend them as easily as if they were her classmates. She told us that thanks to my grandfather, the dark feelings she'd carried from the awkwardness with her classmates started to fade. And having friends her age gave her the confidence to return to school. As she continued to play with the island kids, her health gradually improved. And she no longer collapsed from exhaustion or caught colds after running around with them. Eventually, her parents told her that she was well enough to leave, and just days before her elementary school graduation, they announced they were going home. Mia's enjoyable time on the island came to an end after about 2 years, and she went back to her hometown to enter middle school. She was so fond of island life that she even pleaded with her parents to let her attend the middle school here. However, her parents, hoping she would become a doctor and knowing the island's middle school was in decline, didn't allow it. Mia left the island in tears, vowing she would return one day. Mia then mentioned there was something else she was grateful to my grandfather for. As a child, she had felt despair, believing she had no choice but to follow the path her parents had set out for her. It wasn't that she hated the idea of becoming a doctor, but she resented being pushed into it just because her parents were doctors, as if there were no other option for her future. I had my own will, too. But since they were my parents, I didn't want to upset them, so I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I was always serious and obedient, so the thought of arguing with them was unthinkable, she said. During that time, my grandfather told Mia, who had complained about not wanting to be a doctor, "Look, no parent is going to abandon their child just because they get upset. Sure, there are terrible parents out there. But I don't think yours are like that. They moved to this island for you, didn't they? They even took time off work for it. Not many parents would go that far. So, if you're honest with them, maybe things will change little by little. Maybe their wishes won't change. But if you show them you can stand on your own 2 feet, they'll see that you can live well even without being a doctor. If they love you, they'll understand." Encouraged by his words, Mia told her parents she didn't want to take the private school entrance exams and chose to attend public middle school instead. Later, after searching the web, she learned that medical services on the island were scarce. And that's when she decided to become a doctor after all. My grandfather, not knowing this was the reason Mia had returned to the island as a doctor, looked astonished. I, too, was surprised to hear about my grandfather's past involvement in her life. With a soft smile, my grandfather said, "I see. Mia, you cared about this island that much. It's true, this island doesn't have much left. And none of us ever expected a young doctor to come. When the previous doctor collapsed, it was a serious issue. And everyone was worried about what the government would do. I thought they'd just send some random doctor from a university hospital, someone who didn't want to be here. But Mia, you're different. You're always so kind and smiling with the islanders, and you're a skilled doctor, too. To us, you're nothing short of a savior. Thank you for becoming a doctor for the sake of this island. But I'm sorry if we've put too much on your shoulders," Mia shook her head and said. She said that whether she became a doctor or not, she knew she absolutely wanted to come back to this island. When it comes to jobs here, there's only farming, fishing, or being a doctor. So, being a doctor was really the only thing she could do, and she was okay with that. Then, with a shy but adorable smile, she added, "I'm sorry I cried so much back then. And thank you for always helping me. Like that time when I slipped into deep water or when I tripped over that huge sea cucumber. I really appreciate it." Mia looked genuinely happy to see my grandfather again. That's when my grandfather smirked and said, "Oh, by the way, Alex here used to be a doctor, too. What do you think, Alex? It must get tough for Mia to handle everything alone. How about taking a break from fishing and helping her out at the clinic sometimes?" I was 38. Mia was 35 at the time. And we were both single. I realized what he was getting at as Mia blushed and said, "It's true that handling emergencies by myself can be difficult. So I'd appreciate any help you can offer." With no way to refuse, I ended up continuing my medical career, despite having retired. Still, I was relieved that my skills hadn't deteriorated too much yet. Had several years passed since my retirement, it might have been a different story. If I couldn't perform surgery properly, there could be cases where it would be too late to help. I figured a doctor who couldn't treat patients when they couldn't make it to the larger hospital on the mainland would be no good. But here, unlike my previous job, things weren't as hectic, so I figured I could manage. And besides, I wanted to help the people in need. So I agreed to my grandfather's suggestion. A year later, although there were moments when things between Mia and me seemed to be heading somewhere, we never crossed that line. Even now, we continue working together at the clinic as good colleagues. Though it didn't turn into a romance, that's just like me, I guess. My grandfather, on the other hand, couldn't hide his disappointment, saying, "Well, that's a shame." I used to think I was done with work, but being thanked every day and having responsibilities gives life a real sense of purpose. Even elderly people work in chain stores or medical facilities. And now I understand their desire to keep working for life. Being told thank you by someone, working to make someone smile. It's far more fulfilling than just doing whatever I want by myself. Thanks to my grandfather and Mia, I feel like I've learned what's truly important in life. With that thought in mind, I head once again to the small village clinic today.